So welcome everyone to the 20th session of our Thought Leadership Series. Thank you so much for joining us today. This year we're actually focused on the new realities of the future of work and its implication for justice-impacted job seekers. My name is Jason White. I'm the founder, president, and CEO of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. And today our focus for this session is high potential industries. In this highly competitive job markets, the big question that we're seeking to answer today is, where can justice impacted job seekers find good jobs? So when we think about the competitive landscape, which industries should we be considering? And as we consider these industries, our focus is not on just simply finding any job, but where can they find good jobs that they can, where there can be pathways towards economic mobility. So I'm really excited to invite our panelists to join me at this time. I'm just going to mention their name, and afterwards they're going to be introducing themselves. So we have Steph Dolan, who is the program manager at the Corporate Coalition of Chicago. We also have Tara Harper, who is Chief External Officer from Cara Collective. And by the way, both persons are based in Chicago, so we're looking forward to learn a little bit more about the Chicago landscape today. And then we also have Stephanie Ferguson Melhorn, who is the Executive Director of Workforce and International Labor Policy from the U.S. Department of Labor. I'm going to give you guys a quick minute to introduce yourself. Steph, we'll start with you, then Stephanie, and then Tara. You could introduce yourself afterwards.
Great. Thanks so much, Jason, for having us today. Really appreciate the chance to speak with all of you. I'm Steph Dolan. I'm a director at the Corporate Coalition of Chicago. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Corporate Coalition, we're a network of over 50 companies who are committed to changing the way businesses operate, who they hire, how they build their culture, how they retain staff, and how they engage with the community. I lead our Fair Chance Hiring Initiative. So I support employers across Chicago who want to tackle internal HR and broader organizational practices so they can more effectively hire, retain, and advance individuals with records within their organizations.
Hello, everybody. I'm Stephanie Ferguson Melhorn with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is the world's largest business federation, and so we represent employers from across every state and every industry. And I lead our workforce portfolio. So it's my job to ensure that businesses in the United States have a healthy talent pool from which they can recruit and retain workers. Glad to be here with you all.
And I think I'm rounding out the team. Good afternoon, everyone. Tara Harper, Chief External Affairs Officer at Cara Collective. For those of you unfamiliar with Cara, we are a workforce development organization based out of Chicago. We serve about 1,000 job seekers a year. About 70%, if not more, have been impacted by the justice system. But our work is a bit unique is that it sits at the intersection of both job seeker and employer. And so not only are we really focused on the job seekers and preparing them for meaningful employment opportunities, but we're also working with our employer partners in partnership with Corporate Coalition. We do that work both here in Chicago, but across the country to think about how do you ensure that you're bringing together both untapped talent and employers at the same time, and what does that work actually look like? And so in my role, amongst many things, I oversee both of our employer relationships along with our national expansion and the work that we're doing in terms of practice change across the country.
Awesome. Well, listen, panelists, so grateful for your time, as I shared with you when we were preparing, for you to give your time to share. You're really contributing to the field, so thank you for your willingness to do that. Before we get into our conversation, I do just want to share with all who are attending, if you have any questions, we would love to hear from you. You can do that by submitting it in the Q&A pod. We're going to take questions at the end. However, as the conversation unfolds, please don't hesitate to share your question. We're going to do our best to get to as many as we can. So, you know what, Tara, I would love to start with you. What changes have you seen in the landscape over the last couple of years?
Jason, will you repeat that one more time? Had a hard time hearing you. Sorry.
Yeah, what changes have you seen in the landscape over the last 2 years?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting, really, I would say the last 2 to 4 years, kind of the post-pandemic world in terms of what we're seeing for our job seekers, particularly here in Chicago. And there's a couple of things. We've seen most recently a lot of layoffs happening with a lot of major companies that typically hired kind of at scale and at volume, right? So really large organizations that have those like large repetitive roles. We're seeing lots of layoffs over the past
Mhm.
few years. In addition, we're seeing less turnover, right? So people are staying in their job for longer period of time. I think that the new phrase was like job hugging, right? And so we're seeing this really challenging kind of employment market, really for people at large. We were just talking before this, Jason, about recent college graduates, right? They're really struggling to find their space in the job market. And so I lift all of those things up to say, what does that mean then for non-traditional talent? What does that mean for individuals who've been impacted by the justice system? And what does that mean for workforce development organizations that are working not only to prepare talent, but really provide pathways to meaningful employment? And so part of what we need to be really hyper-focused on, which very much needs to be at a regional level, is what are those, when we talk about like growth industries, what are those growth industries within a specific region that are kind of the things that what we're always looking for is like they have a low barrier to entry. So they lend themselves to less degree requirements. They're not necessarily having really challenging background screening processes, but that also provide high wage potential. So there's mobility baked into the employment opportunity. It is not just entry level roles that don't lead to anything. And so those are some of the shifts that we're seeing kind of just in the broader market system that then is saying to like organizations like us, what does that mean to our approach as we engage employers?
Yeah, what you said make a ton of sense to me, Tara, because if we have a tight labor market and opportunities are more sparse, so to say, it is important. I mean, it's always important to have the right fit, but the fit is even more important, right? Because when you do find an opportunity, you want to hold on to it, but obviously you want job seekers to find opportunity where there's opportunity, where there's a chance for them to be able to advance their career and earn a reasonable living. So that being said, curious to hear Steph's perspective on this, considering you're both from Chicago. Would love to hear what industries are showing the strongest growth potential. Steph, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah. So, like I said during my introduction, the Corporate Coalition, in partnership with Cara and Tara's team, runs a cohort for employers who are pursuing Fair Chance. So, over the last 4 years that we've run the cohort, we've been able to see some sort of key trends and themes come up in terms of the types of industries that are actively participating. And I will say to date, we've run 4 cohorts over 4 years. We have consistently seen that healthcare is our biggest participant. So of the 24 companies that have participated, 7 have been some of the largest healthcare systems, either in Chicago or regionally or even at sort of a semi-national scale. And in fact, we've had so many healthcare companies come through that in the spring we hosted a healthcare specific sort of lunch and learn and community of practice for them to be able to share out about what are they doing when it comes to Fair Chance, what opportunities do they see, what challenges are they running into. And then I also was able to like pull some data from one of our workforce partners, and they said that over the last year, 20% of their placements for individuals with records were in the healthcare space. And so just want to lift that up. Even though we know that there can be a lot of regulations around types of roles and types of convictions that may disqualify individuals from certain types of positions within healthcare, there still seem to be very many opportunities, and there's a lot of not just job growth like potential in terms of numbers of roles, but we do know that hospital systems do a pretty good job of helping to move people through an organization as well. The other industries that I think we hear about are retail, hospitality, manufacturing. These are areas where we continue to see opportunities, although at sort of lower rates given the current economic uncertainty. But we have had conversations with local manufacturers who have said that they need talent, but they do feel, a certain level of uncertainty around costs that's driving that hesitancy to hire right now. And I think just to wrap up on this, we're hearing that retention is really the name of the game right now. I think that segues with what Tara said too. Companies right now, even if they're a little hesitant to hire, there is real interest in retaining that talent. And so just encourage, folks in the audience to think about what does that mean for the power of your candidates and thinking through wages, benefits, scheduling, and opportunities for growth.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Steph. So you mentioned healthcare, retail, hospitality. And by the way, Stephanie, not sure because you have a national purview. If there's any other industry you want to mention, feel free to jump in at any point. That being said, when you talk about these three industries, I'm just curious to hear if there are any particular drivers and key factors that you would say is driving demand, I would say consistent demand, because remember, we were just talking about how competitive the job market is, meaning we have more supply of labor than opportunities in most industries. However, we do have these industries that seem to be showing different, much different type of situation. That being said, not sure if there's any other industries you want to mention, Stephanie, but if not, I'm curious to even hear what are the key drivers that we see drive some of these demand that seem to be consistent in these industries.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. At the national view, I would back up a little bit. At the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we do have a big data article. We call it a data center, but that has a different meaning now, right? So you got to figure out a new name. But we have data articles on our website that talk about the worker shortage in the United States. And while, yes, nationally, there is no longer a shortage and we have more individuals who are available to work than we have open jobs, is true. The national reality does not necessarily reflect what's happening on the ground. So many states are still experiencing a labor market in which there are half as many available workers available to them for every open job that they have. So there's a physical challenge as far as worker shortages go in the States. There's also a challenge for skills, right? We have a skill shortage across the entire nation. So even if you're in a state that has more available workers and open jobs, that doesn't mean that all those workers have the right education or training to fill the jobs that are in demand. So we have to make sure that when we're talking about this, it's like fitting the right puzzle pieces together and making sure that you have a talent market that's available to be productive in that job on day one. I think that there are a couple of reasons why we're seeing shortages in so many industries. And one of them is a kind of an education factor, right? Where we don't have the data that we need to inform students and families of what educational paths they can pursue that will ensure that they have the right education to have to be matched with an in-demand job in the future, right? We've seen historically that students continue to pursue a business degree in the highest numbers, and yet that's not necessarily the degree or the education needed to participate in the in-demand industries. So that's contributing to the skills mismatch a little bit. The other thing I'll say is that for a long time, we've communicated in this nation that a four-year degree is the only way to be successful. I think that a four-year degree is highly valuable, and folks should, of course, pursue that. But we also haven't really talked about the skilled trades in a way that make it seem like a successful path in this country. And so we're seeing a significant shortage for workers in those trades like construction, plumbing, electricians, et cetera. Now, here's where the future and the past meet a little bit. Of course, we all know that there are significant investments being made in tech and that industry is moving at rapid speed. And there have been a lot of calls for the need for more tech workers, individuals who are really savvy on AI, et cetera. But you have to understand that in order for us to really move at the speed that's being asked of business for these industries, you have to have the individuals who are able to create the infrastructure around it too, right? So I think some of the pressures that are being put on the labor shortage now is finding and training the workers to be able to meet the demands of the tech world today, and of course of the workers who are able to support that growth in a real tangible way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for shedding some light in terms of some of those drivers. What I'm hearing, there's some consideration, even though we generally have a more competitive market, if we look at certain localities, the realities may be different. And even when you add on the industry on top of that, you may find pockets of opportunities that are available. And then the skills, that makes a ton of sense. And especially in this labor market that's changing so much, getting the right skills aligned with the opportunities that are available is critical. Let me ask this question. Stephanie, I'm just going to follow up with you again. You being at the Chamber of Commerce, what are businesses saying across the country about the need for talent, right? So when you think about some of the questions that they're asking and some of the insight that you've been receiving, and I know you talk a little bit about this as you talked initially, but I'm just curious to see if there's any particular trend that you're noticing that you'd like to share.
Yeah, happy. We still hear from our members all the time in different industries and different localities where they're having a hard time finding the workers that they need. And so what we're hearing is that solutions are ensuring that workers have access to training and to educational programs, especially those that are more short-term educational programs that are focused in in-demand industries. And we're hearing that employers are really open to ways to make it easier for workers to participate in the labor force, right? For a long time, it's been difficult in many different ways. We know that having a criminal record or being previously incarcerated can be a barrier to participating workforce participation. So many of our members are certainly actively in favor of breaking down those barriers. There are other factors too, like not being able to access childcare or access housing. So in addition to ensuring that our workforce has the ability to get the skills and needed to participate in the workforce, we have to make sure too that nothing's holding them back if they want to be participating.
Awesome. Tara, I'm going to throw one at you, okay? Just to
Yeah, I was
up.
actually, can I piggyback before you throw another question, Jason?
Please, go ahead.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Stephanie said just for a minute. I really want to double click on what she said, because I think that this becomes, what we're seeing across the country tells one story. I think where the opportunity for workforce development organizations or organizations like the Corporate Coalition is like, how do you really drill down into what is happening in that city? Because sometimes what you're seeing at the national landscape isn't always the reality. And I'll give a good example that we talked about before. One of the growth areas, if you were to just do a quick Google search and say, what are one of the growth areas, industries in Chicago? Manufacturing truly is one of those. And historically, manufacturing has lower barriers to entry. And we know provides, again, what we're looking for, is there a pathway to mobility, right? So it's like on paper, it feels super ideal. But what is actually happening is that many of those, not all, there are manufacturing companies in Chicago. Once upon a time, there was a ton of manufacturing companies in Chicago. But over time, a lot of that has shifted to what we call like the collar counties, right? And so that can be an hour and a half out of kind of metro city. And for non-traditional talent or talent who's been impacted by the justice system, that ability to get out there can be really, really challenging, right? And so while we're trying to create innovative approaches to solving for some of those transportation barriers, that also impacts one's own ability to navigate like a healthy, holistic lifestyle. So even if I can solve for you providing transportation, if you are now, your transportation requires 90 minutes to 2 hours each way, like that is also impacting your quality of life, the quality of life of your family. And so I think again for us, it's like, what are the opportunities? What are the shifts that organizations need to make that are hyper focused on what are the needs, the supply and the demand that exist in your city? If you're in a port city, what does that mean for you, right? Like, do you understand what that looks like differently? And then to Stephanie's point, I think the days of, I might get in trouble at Cara for a quick second about what I'm about to say, but the days of like life skills being the only supports that you're providing may not in this market be what is going to connect the dots for our justice impacted individuals into those meaningful employments. And so we need to do more intentional. What are the right credentialing? What are the right certification programming? How do we connect people earlier, right? While they're even before release, if you're in incarceration. And so I think those are some of the things that are going to allow us to make sure that we're actually able to take advantage of those industries and of those growth opportunities.
Tara, I want to keep you on the spot because you raised a very good point, and I'm so glad you jumped in, which is what I was going to ask you to chime in on what Stephanie shared. But can I just underscore, you talked about being very deliberate to ensure that you're looking at the skills, the credential that the individual need to really be competitive, right? I'm just curious, do you think that engagement with the actual employer, so think about it, put on your community-based organization cap now, and think about the folks that are in the room, so to say, with us, who are from community-based groups. Should there be any change in how they engage with employers, given what's happening now with the competitiveness of the job market?
Yes, absolutely. I could keep it short if you want me to and just say yes, Jason.
You can add a little bit to it. Add a little bit to that.
But you're probably like, how? Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, again, you have to actually understand what is happening in the marketplace. And I think that for many workforce organizations, us included, our expertise is in how do we support job seekers, right? Like that is
Yes.
where we excel. We know how to, when we think about what does it take to actually prepare job seekers for employment, us, along with many organizations, do a really phenomenal job. When we're talking about how do you think about placement and retention, a really key driver of placement and retention is, are there actual opportunities available? And
Yes.
do you understand those opportunities? What is it going to take to be successful? And so for us, one of the things that we do, in our business development work and our practice change work is to really understand what is the value proposition to our employers. Do we understand their talent acquisition challenges? And
Yes.
how do we become an extension of their talent acquisition strategy? This is not charity work. Hiring our job seekers is not. You have a business need. You need employees. We have them. We are providing a service to you, and it needs to be viewed. But that means that I need to better understand what is driving that business to make their hiring decisions when those fluctuations happen, and where there's additional job verticals within those employer partners, right? So healthcare, bless you. Healthcare is a really good example of like, do we understand what are the different types of roles? Are we talking about community health workers? Are we talking about phlebotomists? Are we talking about like, what are those? And then what are the paths and how do we set people up for success?
I love that term that you use, thinking of your work as an extension of the employer's talent acquisition strategy, right? And that's really where things are now. And if we're not thinking that, it's almost like you're not showing up, so to say. So I appreciate you emphasizing that. Steph, I'm curious to hear if you wanted to add anything to this, especially when you think about, for example, long-term career pathway growth and economic mobility. Any thoughts on that as far as the job seekers are concerned and the groups that support the job seekers?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the economic mobility piece, I think, a couple of things. So first, whenever, like when we launch our cohort, we tend to underscore the importance of focusing on advancement from day one. We start asking our employers, even in the early days, what are you thinking about? Many of them come in and they are still early on their Fair Chance journey. And so they're very focused on recruitment. But I think one of the strengths that the Corporate Coalition and Cara bring is, we very quickly start asking questions around promotions, career pathways. So they start thinking about it. And then later in the cohort, we have an entire session that's dedicated to advancement, where we bring in companies who are doing it well to share what they are doing. Right. And the idea is, we want to drill home for our cohort members that Fair Chance isn't just hiring someone, it's making sure that that individual wants to stay, wants to grow, and that they see the opportunities to do that. So with that in mind, like we've seen a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight. And, some of it is it does bring me back to healthcare.
Right.
We know that healthcare offers some unique opportunities for folks to either rise up, in their unit, but also healthcare does offer opportunities to folks to make like a lateral move and then rise up as well. Right.
Mm.
And so we know you have to keep in mind the regulations that each state has on what roles an individual with a record can undertake, but you also realize that many of those regulations have certain look back periods. And so the
Mm.
longer someone is at a hospital system, that look back period starts to recede. I think hospital systems are also well known for thinking about career pathways for folks and having strong training programs, having funding for people to pursue continuing education. So, all of that is to say, I think there are a couple questions in the chat talking about the opportunity to rise up. I think that if healthcare systems are intentional about this and they are stated, dedicated, fair chance employers, they do think about this and help to think about how can you help people navigate. The other piece is, I'd say like creativity too. We have a manufacturer who's part of our cohort this year, and they're a small manufacturer. They're, 170 people. They recognize that they might not be able to promote every single individual that they would want to promote within their organization just because it's small. And so what they've been thinking about is how can they partner with other organizations that are nearby to be able to share the resumes of
Mm.
individuals who they think are, ripe for promotion. Give them, essentially that leg up in the application process, so that then they can make that shift from a $18 an hour role to a $32 an hour role that has a whole other trajectory upward, right?
Right.
So I think like that's where it's one for the workforce orgs who are on this call, it's starting to think early about like how can you talk about advancement and career pathways with those organizations so that it's sort of seated in their mind.
Right.
It's looking for like those innovative solutions too and lifting those up.
It's interesting. I'm so grateful for you sharing that because one of the things that we even teach in some of the employer engagement training work that we do with practitioners is the idea that retention is not just simply about keeping someone at the job that they currently retain, right? Because sometimes they need to move on, right? They have a family to take care of and they have growth to take advantage of. Well, how do you work with employers to help them to retain their capacity? So an individual may move on, but then you have another person coming in to take that slot. So you're retaining the employer's capacity, but at the same time, you're helping someone to move on. So I'm encouraged to hear that your cohort groups, businesses in your cohort are thinking in that way. That's awesome. It shows the power of the program that you're doing, but the power of the role of the workforce development organization that's working with these companies. Because that, by the way, that's not common. It's not common thinking like for a business to think that way on their own. So that's awesome. That's great coaching. Um, I have a quick question here. There has been quite a bit of changes that we've been seeing. And oftentimes there's a lot of emphasis placed on, for example, certain industry, federal government We're seeing certain industry being highlighted in grant applications or grant announcement, I should say, and other stakeholders. I'm curious to get your thoughts. What are some of the industries that are being emphasized now, especially by the federal government and other agencies that may be seeing something coming in the future? And even as you talk about that, I'm curious to hear what you're actually seeing on the ground, if there is correlation with that. So could you?
I'm happy to answer that one. So I think the theme that we're seeing from the Department of Labor right now, the administration broadly, is that they really want to put an emphasis on funding or supporting programs that lead to high-skilled, high-paid, in-demand jobs. We're seeing that again and again and again. And I think that those three criteria really lend themselves to jobs, to Steph and Tara's point, in the healthcare industry. There's major shortages there, and there's always going to be demand in healthcare. It's a high-skilled sector. In the skilled trades, like we talked about before, and in tech as well. So I think that the other great part of this too is that in a lot of the proposed policies, or even those that have been passed and are being implemented now, above and beyond meeting those three criteria, we're also seeing that these pieces of legislation are asking for governors to really work with experts in their state, including employers and other community organizations, to really hear on the ground, like, what is it that you need? What really is in demand in my state? Because it may differ from other states. And they can work together to truly understand what the credentials or certificates are that are needed to be able to move into the in-demand jobs that they've been able to define together. And I would like to take a moment just to call out what these programs are, because we're really excited to see that things that we've been advocating for many years at the U.S. Chamber are coming to fruition. One of the administration's really big policy priorities right now is to meet 1 million new active registered apprenticeships in these high-skilled, high-paying, in-demand jobs, right? So we're seeing a lot of folks now really paying attention to how we can improve the apprenticeship program and get a lot of folks into that program. If you're not already involved, get involved there. Another thing that we've seen is that Workforce Pell was authorized in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and final regulation was released just a couple of weeks ago. And so we should see states really starting to implement Workforce Pell. And this is a program that helps individuals access funding to do a short-term program, 8 to 15 weeks, to get an in-demand credential that will help them compete and get into the job market right away. Another big signal that we're seeing, particularly of interest for this group here, is that Congress and the administration continue to signal that providing supports for individuals that have been recently released are continue to be a priority. So in WIOA reauthorization, which was introduced a few weeks ago, there was specific mention made to folks in this that were justice involved. We've also seen the administration put out a grant opportunity, the Restart grants, that would, again, help individuals get that have been recently released from incarceration, get specific funding for them to get training for in-demand jobs. So I think what the takeaway is here is that folks at the policymaking level have heard from businesses that we have a difficult time getting the skilled talent that we need, and they're putting into place solutions that help individuals who have often had a difficult time breaking through and getting into these good jobs have an opportunity to do so.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting those things that we ought to be paying attention to. Stephanie, I wanted to ask a question, and I'm curious to hear even what's going on in Chicago. You highlighted a registered apprenticeship, and I think registered apprenticeship is one of those pathways where once you get in, given oftentimes the type of jobs that are offered and the earning potential, and especially if you don't have a debt, you don't have debt, college debt, it really could set you up for a very bright future. But when we think about justice impacted job seekers and many of the organizations that we work with, for some reason, it kind of seems far reaching. So I'm just curious to hear, even with Chicago, are we seeing more of an emergence of registered apprenticeship? Even at our conference, we're going to have folks talk about registered apprenticeship because we want to raise awareness, because we are just not seeing as much of engagement with registered apprenticeship as it relates to justice impacted job seekers. So I'm just curious to hear what you guys are seeing in Chicago or anywhere else. And by the way, Stephanie, feel free to jump in again if you want to add anything else to that thought. Anything, Steph or Tara, regarding registered apprenticeship in Chicago that you've been noticing?
Not that I can say that I'm witnessing. We have an organization here in Chicago, the Apprenticeship Network, that does a lot of that work across the city, and works with a number of employers on different opportunities. I don't know how well historically, so let me just say, like, historically, how well those programs aligned with justice impacted individuals. So
Yes.
I'm happy to hear that there's more of an appetite maybe than might be perceived in terms of like actually pursuing this opportunity, because I do think at the end of the day, we do need to think about what is the upskilling and the high skill demand opportunities for this population. Everything Stephanie said, I'm just double clicking on, like, absolutely. There is an aging population that we know, and there is an entire population of incredible talent that also data demonstrates that tend to stick and stay longer. So Steph mentioned the idea about, like, if retention is the name of the game for employers, how are we helping them understand that there's an entire talent pipeline and pool of individuals who will stick and stay on the job much longer than your traditional workforce has. But how do we connect them to those credentialing that I think is going to be ultimately what is the key in helping create that right pipeline to the right jobs.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to remind our audience that please do share your questions in the Q&A pod if you have any. In about 5 minutes, we're going to be taking those questions that you submitted. I see a few submitted already. Please don't hesitate to share questions if you do have them. All right. So I wanted to ask some advice. We have talked about our attendees like to take things with them and implement it afterwards, right? So very curious to hear your perspective. What advice would you give to the folks who have given up their time to something else and come to join us today to listen to what we had to share? What advice would you give?
Oh, you beat me to the mute. You beat me to the mute.
Go ahead, Stephanie. I'll go after you.
Oh, good. Save the better for later. I would just quickly say to talk to your state and local chambers, right? I've seen that folks are already in the chat talking about, like, how do we get involved? How do we see which employers are what they need? How do we overcome, background check difficulties when folks are searching for employment? I think that you can get a lot of value from talking to state and local chambers that are in conversation with local employers day in and day out. It's going to be the most practical avenue that you can take to getting that one-on-one information.
Awesome. Stephanie, when we engage with CBOs and they're thinking about finding employers, we often recommend that they engage with their chambers because literally there's so many local chambers that are mobilizing businesses. So I'm glad you were able to hear and remind all of us of that. So, Tara, advice?
It was literally exactly what Stephanie said, which is to connect with your state and local chambers. And in addition, and I know that this sometimes can be challenging for CBOs, think about the resources that you are also dedicating to engaging in employer work. It really does pay off dramatically. And so think about, do you have somebody who is focused on business development, who is learning the landscape, understanding the shifts in employer needs, what that means locally? Are there other partner organizations in your city who may be doing that work and doing it really well? How do you create a collaborative? We've done a lot of that here in Chicago. I think that part of what has allowed us to have success is the fact that an organization like ours partners with the corporate coalition whose membership is steeped in the corporate world. We also have what we call the civic committee, which is another network of employers that are deeply invested in Chicago. And so to the degree that if those things exist in your city, connect to them in a really meaningful way. If they don't, inspire people to come together. Because I think that at the end of the day, if we're not ensuring that we're meeting supply and demand at the same time and they're not working in parallel, you can prepare talent all you want, but if there's no opportunities at the end of the day, we're not going to solve for this.
So thank you, Tara. Steph.
I'll chime in, I guess, with the last piece of advice. And, I always approach this from the sort of employer perspective, just given the nature of the work that I do. And I think for me, I know that the employers are looking to each other to understand best practices and to figure out what norms and what good can look like. So, especially for the workforce organizations in the audience today, it's, one, talking about quality jobs, talking about advancement opportunities, getting to know the employer and really truly understanding like what are those career pathways look like, what could they look like there. And then if you find an employer who's doing it well, making sure to continue to cultivate that relationship, not just so that you can get more people placed there, but also in the hopes that that employer will be willing to share what they're doing. Because if you get an employer who's doing it well, who is willing to share it with other employers, that's when other companies will sit up and listen and say, oh, I'm going to take notes on this because they thought creatively, if they did it, I bet we can do it too. So I would say talk about it, find some champions, and to the extent possible, then leverage those champions to be able to continue to build the field.
Awesome. You're so right. There's nothing more powerful than an employer telling an employer to get on board, right? So absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Steph. We do have a few questions, so we're gonna do our best to get back to some of the questions that are submitted from our audience. And if we go kind of back to the healthcare conversation, right? We talked about that industry being one of those ones that have been sustaining its growth. The question that Lori has for us today is, what role in healthcare industry are you seeing having the biggest growth for individuals with a record? Are there certain specific type of jobs that you are maybe seeing that are often a fit?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first pass at this, but Tara, I know that you'll have a perspective given how frequently you guys are placing folks in healthcare roles too. So first of all, I know that this is going to change state to state. So in the state of Illinois, hospitals need to abide by the Illinois Department of Public Health regulations, which do lay out like essentially like what are disqualifying record or what are records that would disqualify individuals from being able to hold certain roles. And many of those roles are patient facing. So when we work with hospital systems to place individuals with records, they are looking initially at least at roles like environmental services, food service and catering, clerical, admin, billing, maintenance, sort of like back office type stuff, inventory and warehousing management. So in some cases, patient transport. For many of these organizations, they're using those as kind of the like, let's get people in, let's give them the work experience, let's give them at least a ladder within those units. And then over time, being able to then introduce them to other avenues. But Tara, I know Cara places so many individuals in the hospital systems across Chicagoland. I'd love to hear from you too.
You literally hit it, Steph, on the head. All of the roles. I was going to say patient transport is a big area that we do place into, and for at Cara, because we are serving both folks who have backgrounds and folks who have other barriers, perhaps, but not backgrounds. So that allows us some flexibility to tap into some of those other roles and avenues into the healthcare system. But I know that there's a lot of effort particularly in Illinois right now, to look at, are there opportunities to remove some of those regulations and create more opportunities, or look at what are the type of backgrounds, and maybe it's not all of these backgrounds. Can we widen the door a bit, right? Because we know, and I think most of this is being driven, I don't know this to be true, but I'm going to say, I think this is being driven, there's a need. There is a shortage in the healthcare industry. And so anytime there is an actual shortage and a need, that creates opportunities and innovation, and then the realization that this always should have been what was in place, right? And so I think, to earlier points, it's like, how do we continue to engage in partnership? And some of that work just means that it does take a little bit long, right? It takes a little bit of a longer path. You have to have kind of the long view a little bit when you're working with these partnerships, to say, hey, they may have this policy in place today, but our goal is, through the practice change work, that perhaps we can move that needle, and we've got a talent pipeline that's ready to go when that happens.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. Love it, Tara. Thank you. Thank you for that. There's a follow-up question here, actually, from Adrienne. She's asking about some of these roles that are mentioned. So obviously, many of them are entry-level jobs, right? When you talk about opportunities for advancement, and I know oftentimes, and I think, Steph, you mentioned it earlier, that hospital systems are often good at establishing career pathways. But what about the justice impacted individuals who go in? Are we seeing that these individuals are advancing over time?
Tara, again, you might be able to talk to like how you've seen Cara participants go through and sort of rise up. But what I will say is, we have worked with 2 hospital systems specifically on this topic through our cohort. One of them is Chicago-based, one of them is Michigan-based. But what I think for both of them, they wanted to sort of strengthen their career advancement, or their career, like the ladder that individuals could rise up through. And then 2, they wanted to bake in like navigation resources for individuals with records specifically, so that, like an individual doesn't go through additional training only to then realize, I'm not qualified, I need to wait 4 more years until that look back period expires, right? And so, like, no simple, like, great answer that I can give to that question, but I know that there are hospital systems who are thinking about this. They are aware of the challenge, and they're thinking about specifically, how can we get like navigation coaches in place to be able to help provide sort of the counseling and guidance to folks who, as they want to rise up in the organization, are getting some direction based on their backgrounds, about where the best opportunities lie and how to get that as specific as possible based on the role and their individual record.
Awesome. Thank you very much. There's a question here from A.D. Rosen. This has to do with states, so I'm not sure if you just want to speak to your state, or Stephanie, if you have thoughts about multiple states that you have seen and are experienced. The question is, do most states participate in some form of Fair Chance Act employment? No. So in other words, what are we seeing from state to state? Not sure if you want to highlight a particular state. What are they doing to promote fair chance hiring statewide in some of these states? Any thoughts on that?
I'm focused on national, so I'm not sure what we're seeing state to state, but I know that there are a lot of states who are doing a really good job in partnering with local incarceration facilities. I think Kentucky is one of them, that are making sure that there is a pipeline, an education to job pipeline for this community. And I think I was like Googling on the side that that Ban the Box has been expanding across many states. I think it's for the private sector in 15 states now. And we continue to see, again, even though it's at the national level, that many members of Congress from all different states on both sides of the aisle are supportive of measures that help formerly incarcerated get access to education, job placement, and support services. I'm sorry that I can't speak exactly to this act and how it's being implemented in the states, but I would say that like we're seeing broad support for the initiative across the nation.
Yeah, I'll add in there. I think there are a number of states across the country that have fair chance ordinances, whether that's, city of Chicago and Illinois, whether it's California, LA County, Washington State, Pennsylvania or Philadelphia. Like I am not a policy guru, so I can't rattle all of them off, but I know that those fair chance ordinances do lay out sort of the specific requirements for employers who are hiring folks in those areas, right? And so they will say this is when you're supposed to be doing a background check, to Stephanie's point around ban the box. But then they also lay out like what does an individualized assessment process look like? What is required of an employer to make sure that that employer is meeting sort of those bare minimum, those requirements. And it helps to, I think, one, like protect individuals with records as they go through the hiring process, but it also makes sure that employers like know the right documentation, so that they aren't going to be, served with discrimination lawsuits. So I think for any employer in any of those regions, and there are way more regions than the ones I rattled off, it's just knowing what your local fair chance ordinance is, what is
Mhm.
required of you from a like assessment and documentation perspective. And we're seeing more of those come down the pipeline too. And they tend to be, I think, like in favor of individuals with records. So just good to kind of stay current on that in your environment.
Got it. Thank you very much, Tara. It looks like you're going to add something to that.
No, I was just gonna add, we were talking about this kind of in the pre-call stuff. You lifted this up around this tension point with like, are employers doing this as a result of needing to remain in compliance or not, right? And
Mhm.
is that good or bad? And from my perspective, I too am not a policy person, although I play one on TV, I often say is, when we think about practice change, you do need to think about what's happening at the policy level, what's happening at the practice level, and what's happening at the program level. And so for
Yeah,
me, like policy is really important here in the space that we're doing. Yes, we have to change hearts and minds. Yes, we have to help people understand this notion of risk, right? And I say that in parentheses with intention. But the reality is that it is really important to have these pieces of legislation, not only at a city level, but at a state level and at a national level as well, because that is what is going to help people actually put into practice the things that we know are in the best interest of really both sides again, right? This is a win for employers and this is a win for our community as well.
absolutely. It is certainly a win-win proposition. Uh, I have a question here from Christopher. Christopher um, talked about the individuals who get employment through staffing agency, right? Where the staffing agency take on the individual and work with an employer temporarily for them to work as temp agents there. But one of the things that he raised here is oftentimes when the opportunity opens up for the employee to transition to on the team of the employer, and then there's a background check requirement, oftentimes they're denied. I'm just curious, even in your work, if you have like how any advice for maybe the job seeker or even groups that work with temp agency. I know there are mixed views on the role of temp agency, but I'm just curious to hear if you want to share your thoughts with Christopher here.
I think that we're seeing that many employers are getting more and more actively involved in expanding their talent pools to folks who have been previously incarcerated. And a lot of the challenges come from restrictions that states place on businesses from being able to hire this talent pool. So I think that the way to kind of reduce this is to continue sharing with employers who are not actively participating in this, that it's a great way.
I think Stephanie froze. Okay. I'm not sure if you
I
want
was
to
gonna
chime
say, I feel like I can
in.
probably follow up on what she was saying if I got her vibe. But I think it's continuing to tell the story for employers about why to pursue fair
Some like
chance
best
hiring.
practice.
Here we are. She's back. I will let her finish her sentence. She's
Oh, I think she froze again. Go ahead, Steph,
okay.
please.
So I was gonna say it's one, continuing to tell the story and the business case behind fair chance hiring. I also think some of it is explaining like what is wrong with some of the background check practices, what really good can look like, so that more companies know, like, oh, I just looked at my background check policy and what it lays out is from 1995. Hasn't been updated since 2000. Should probably take a look and realize that there's a chance that maybe there's some stuff that's been grandfathered in that doesn't actually align with your corporate values anymore, right? And so some of it is sharing a bit about what a good background check process looks like in relation to how can you increase hiring from this talent pool. I think the other piece is probably sharing more of the really incredible statistics around like the relative risk for hiring this talent pool and in the sort of lower recidivism rates that many people expect, right? And so there's a whole narrative change piece that comes into play here also.
Mm, got it. Thank you. I'm curious. There's actually another question here about openness to fair chance hiring, especially when you think about the shift in the industry, I mean, in the economy, I should say. Um, do we find that maybe certain industries that have traditionally been open are no longer open, or certain industries that have been hard to get into are it's even more difficult? I'm just curious to hear if there's any industry level trend that you're seeing that has to do with degree of openness to fair chance hiring.
The one that is coming to mind, and I'll maybe say this carefully, I think that um, construction and trades is
Mm,
one, particularly union jobs, right?
yeah.
Is one that has um, been a bit elusive to
Hmm.
access for people with backgrounds. And I don't know, I'm not a union expert, but from what I understand, a lot of that is not driven by regulations. All right. So where we talk about healthcare, where we know financial services, some of these other industries where there is a lot of regulations in place that actually prohibit individuals with certain backgrounds from accessing certain jobs. And again, this may be a false statement, so please, Steph, be like, no, that's not true. I don't know that there's a ton of regulations in the construction and trades that prohibit people with backgrounds. And yet, there's been a big disconnect there, right? Like there's just a really big disconnect. And I think there's a lot of conversation right now recognizing that again there is a need that is driving a different approach. There is a very real talent shortage and an aging talent base that had historically passed down opportunities within family that is not existing anymore, right? So you
Mm,
see entire families, dad did it, uncle did it, brother did it, son did it, like we're all in construction, so we're all, and so as folks are like, I don't want to go into those fields anymore, there's a serious shortage need. And so there is, I think, more interest now in that field that says, how do we bridge this gap? Because there is a ready and willing talent pool
yes.
that would be well suited and excited and thrilled, and I think would excel in this pathway. And so that is the one industry to me that I'm saying like, I think there's a shift here that we can take advantage of.
Yeah, I agree. And you're right. There's an interesting dynamic in the construction industry. So I appreciate you highlighting that, and I think it's things that our providers need to keep in mind. That being said, we're at time. So grateful for you taking the time to participate. Stephanie, I'm so sorry about the internet. We all have had that experience before. But really, really grateful for your time. So Steph, Tara, Stephanie, thank you for participating. Really appreciate your contribution today. Before you guys jump off this conversation, I do want to mention that there's going to be a link that's going to pop up on your screen. If you guys could click that link, we would love to hear from you. We're going to be doing a survey. Listen, our programming we do our programming 100% with you in mind. So we would love to get your feedback. So please do share your thoughts with us. It shouldn't take you more than 2 minutes, if so long. We'd love to get your thoughts on this session. All right. Thanks to my team, Kimberly, Michael, Michelle, who have been helping in the background. Really grateful for your support. And again, thanks again to our panelists and everyone who joined to make this a success. I'm really grateful for your time. You'll notice that the contact information for our speakers are here on the screen, so feel free to reach out to them. And again, thank you so much, and you take care.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thanks,
All right.
Jason. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.